Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
I hope you're well this morning. Today I'm excited. You know why? First, just because I am the host of the Aurum podcast. And for those who this is your first time to join our podcast, but the pause. Go back on our YouTube, our Facebook page, just listen and watch the amazing content we put out every Saturday. So you'll find us here every Saturday at 9 o'clock. Now, who are we? So, Aurum Podcast is a place where we believe we are building healthy teams. We believe that people are the center of the business. And if you take care of people, the people will take care of your business, right? And we are happy to be joined by an amazing team. And one of them is Anthony Kuria, who will introduce himself. And we have also the amazing Zipporah Kuria, who's also our in-house HR consultant. Guys, good morning. How
Good
you guys
morning,
doing? Are you
Morning. Good
warm
morning,
first? Are you
Kenji.
feeling warm?
Oh,
Kenji.
it's
We are.
cold, but I think you're bringing so much energy, starting to feel warm.
I have to.
Yes,
I have to.
yes.
Because you guys have been so diligent every Saturday informing us. So I'm like,
Mhm.
let me try and warm your seats. Tony, this feels actually nice to be here as the chairman and host.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. As Kenji has said, I will introduce myself. I am a risk director, risk and compliance director at Aurum Consultants. And I'm looking forward to today's session to discuss the matters we have today to discuss about. Thank you, Kenji.
Fantastic. Zippy, tell us
Thank you.
about yourself.
Thank you, Kenji. Good morning. My name is Zipporah Kuria, like Kenji has said, and I'm an HR expert, the lead consultant at Aurum Consultant, and I'm happy to be here to have this conversation and help us understand a bit about workplace risks.
Thank you. Thank you, Zippy and Tony. Guys, karibu sana.
Thank you.
For those also joining us, I just want to walk you through what we do as Aurum consultants. So we do fast HR outsourcing. So in case you need people to come and run your HR department, look no further. That's what we do. We also assist in administration, and also we train your staff. We help you and take out the burden of paying your employees every month. So we will also handle your payroll and also manage your risk assessment and advisory. And for those who are also looking to recruit, whether it's going to be at a entry level as an intern to senior level as CEOs and directors, we offer that as well. So karibu sana. So today's topic is going to be an interesting one, guys. And the reason I think Zipporah and Tony found me worthy of hosting this program is because I feel like, especially as startups, we do not look at risk as an important part of our operations. It's one of those things we neglect. We think, you know what, those are for multinationals. You know, let me first start thinking about my bottom line, how I'll pay my employee, how I'll keep my business open before we start thinking about those sophisticated things like risk. But
Mhm.
today, I think we're going to hear it from the horse's mouth what risk is all about. So, the topic for today is about risk and compliance, and we'll be focusing more on the workplace. So, let me start with my first question. Let's demystify this elephant in the room. What is workplace risk? And let me start with Tony. Tony, because you're the risk expert, I
Yes.
feel like you already have a lot to tell us. Tony.
Okay. Okay. Now, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our podcast today. Now, as you all know, anytime you start a business, in fact, not even a business, anytime you wake up, to rise from your bed, there's a risk already. Because you might rise up too quickly, blood comes down from your head, and then pop, you're back. You're subconscious, and your wife or your husband will have to start resuscitating you. So there is risk in everything. When you wake up, you take a bath, there might be no electricity, or if there is, the shower might be shortchanged, upigwe stima hapo, vitima. You might, preparing yourself, dress up, go to the stage. There are risks everywhere. There are risks concerning the transport system. You could have an accident while going to work. You could reach the workplace, you find the floor is slippery and you fall down. So before we even think about workplace risks, there are risks associated in just the way we live as human beings in this world that has all these manner of issues that we come across. But now, workplace risk is basically, specifically when we focus on it, it is basically the risks that are associated with a workplace. As in, when Kenji, you and your staff, when Zippy and I enter the workplace, what are the things that may potentially jeopardize our health and safety as individuals? Then, secondly, the risks that may come with the work, the business that we do. If you and when you bring that aspect into it, you find there are certain workplaces that are more riskier because of the very nature of the business that is carried out compared to others. For example, an office place where people are just seated in front of their computer desks, working their things, doing everything from an office setting is obviously less risky compared to a workplace where people are constructing a building or constructing a road, or it could be their drivers, or it could be their police, I mean, their guards, guarding a premises. So workplace risks depends on the activity that the entity is carrying out. So there are places which are considerably less risky, and there are places where there are considerably more risks. It could be not necessarily even with what you do, but what you handle. For example, those in manufacturing handling very combustible materials. They're handling probably people who are in the oil and gas industry, people doing manufacturing of vehicles, people doing even manufacturing of brews like Kenya breweries, for example. The workplace, because of the materials that they're handling, the machinery that they're using, they're moving back and forth. There are things overhead, below, and all those kind of things. So the workplace in such a scenario is far higher than somebody who is, say, teaching in a school or in a place
Mm,
where they're simply sitting, accountants just looking at their figures and filling up balance sheets. So the workplace risks really depends on the first of all, it's basically everywhere, but it also depends with the job that you do and the type of industry, the type of work that is being carried out. So, in a nutshell, that is what it involves in workplace risk. I'm sure Zippy has some few other ideas that she could be able to give us.
absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you, Tony. I was just thinking through uh, my level of risk exposure, since I'm
Mm,
not in manufacturing and I work
sure.
from home. So I
Mm,
think like now my biggest risk could be my toddler walking into this podcast, and
yes.
they can they can do something that can embarrass you. Is that a form of risk? I should think that's a form of risk. But Tony,
Well,
before we move on to that,
yes,
let's
yes,
let's listen to what the HR department thinks about risk, because I believe risk is also tied with people, and
yes,
HR has a place in it.
exactly.
Zippy.
Hmm. Thank you, Kenji. And I like what Anthony has said in helping us understand what risk is all about. And the truth is, like you said earlier, most of us, when we start a business, we are thinking about the bottom line. We don't
Mm,
sit back to think about what are some of these risks that could come with what I'm doing. And as a business, when you start engaging people, definitely there are risks that come with engaging people. Um, Think about something simple like what Tony said. You could be walking and you trip. Think about your employee coming to the office and they're walking on the stairs and they trip and they fall and they break a leg. Of course, that's a risk. So, as business people, we need to think what are those risks that come with engaging people. And the law, again, if we come to the HR angle, the law is very clear about what the employer needs to do to make sure we mitigate some of these risks. The employer has a responsibility to protect their employees and anyone who comes within their premises. So it's important for us to be aware about what the law says. And I always like going back to the Employment Act and the OSHA Act of 2007 because it clearly defines what an employer should do to make sure they mitigate some of these risks. And again, when we look at risk, it's important as an employer to think about how do I assess? Because I need to do an assessment and know these are the risks that I could be having within my premises, within my organizations. Once you assess and you understand, then you ask yourself the question of how could these risks happen? So yes, this is a risk. What is the probability of this risk happen? How could they happen? What is the likelihood? And once you understand that, then it helps you actually start thinking about how do I mitigate these risks? Is it an issue of I need to educate people? Is it an issue of I need to put posters? What do I need to do? When you think about risks at the workplace, we are talking about simple things like, ergonomics, for example, which again are very well prescribed when it comes to the law. What is the expectation? And I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go along. So there's a lot we can look at when you're talking about engaging people and dealing with people in the workplace when it comes to risk, because they come with risks and these risks must be mitigated. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves having a lot of challenges. Um, and I think Tony again has explained it very well in terms of how do we deal with these issues that come with starting a business and managing our business, so that we don't end up running a business and the business becomes a burden to us simply because we did not foresee the challenges that would come with running this kind of a business. When you look at people in production area, when you look at people in industries, the risks are higher compared to probably someone who is just working in an office setup. Maybe they're just behind a computer, and that doesn't mean there's no risk. There's still a risk, but the risk levels could be slightly lower compared to someone in a factory setup. So it's important for us to understand what are some of these risks.
Wow. Zippy, that's simply and amazingly put. So what I'm getting is you're saying that first, the law is very clear. It has identified what the possible risks around different workplaces could be and what the employer, and why I'm putting that specific word employer, because they have the authority and responsibility to ensure that the organization aligns with the law, and that's in accordance to risk. So that's such a simple way of putting it. Thank you, Zippy. Now let's just move
Actually,
to
Kenji,
yeah,
just before you go on, one of the
yeah,
things I've realized in my line of work and as I interact with different businesses,
yeah.
it's amazing how, as employers, we are not educated, we are not enlightened, we don't understand what really the law requires us to do. And I'm not so sure whether we are so caught up in the day-to-day running of our business, we don't take time to actually read the laws, because the laws are there and they're available even on internet. But shockingly, most of the time we are caught up because we don't understand. And what I would say, if you're not able to understand, it's important to engage experts who will help you unravel and help you understand what is the requirement from the law. Sometimes what shocks me is when you engage a business person and help them understand some of these issues, there's this feeling of there's too much red taping and bureaucracy in doing business. But think about it. Assuming that bureaucracy was not there, remove your mindset from that. Assuming you had an establishment and here you are working, you have employees, they're dealing with machines, and someone cuts their arm or cuts their finger, and you did not think about it. Even from a human perspective, how would you be able to mitigate that? And the truth is, the laws are there to actually protect us as employers. We might look at it and see or think they are too punitive, but when you look at the bigger picture, they actually protect you as an employer.
Wow, very true, and that's really profound. And I hope employers out there, you're listening to this. In fact, feel free to send in your questions and comments. We'd like to hear also what are your challenges when it comes to this area of risk. So as we move on, In fact, I'm just looking and I'm seeing my screen has this blue light on my specs, and I wear this not because my eyes are spoiled, but to protect me, because I spend a lot of
Mm.
time on the screen from this blue light waves. So, am I
Mhm.
mitigating risk? Have I identified a risk and mitigating it? So let's move on to how do we identify risk as I remove this so that I can see you clearly.
Yes, Kenji, I can see you are already taking steps in risk management.
Mm,
And well, because what you've just done, what you've just described is called risk management. Because what you've done, you've realized you've got to use the computer screen every day. Okay. But now, that means the risk of the blue light, you cannot escape it. You cannot run away from it. So now it means you've got to manage the risk that you're facing in order to do that, because certain risks cannot be avoided. So that what you've just described is called risk management. And risk
mm,
management is a step-by-step process of controlling health and safety risks associated by hazards in the workplace. Basically, that's it. Because there are
mm,
hazards that you cannot avoid. You cannot avoid taking a bus. You cannot avoid sitting in front of your computer. You cannot, if you're a blacksmith, you cannot avoid the fire that comes with heating up the furnace to forge and melt your metals. Because
mm,
if you decide to avoid it altogether, then it means you cannot do what you need to do. So the issue of risk avoidance may not be there. So you've got to find another step which we call risk management. Now, with risk management, you can either do it yourself, like the way you bought your own specs, or you can appoint a competent person to help you. And that means you look around your workplace and see what may cause harm. These things that cause harm are called hazards, you know.
mm,
And so what that means is that you identify the hazards that are there in the office, you assess the risks that are there, you find ways to control the risks, and if you're systematic after identifying and finding ways to control, record your findings, then review the controls, and then now with that, now you're able to clearly identify where the problem is. Now, issues to do with identifying of risks, as I said, is looking around your workplace and identifying what could cause harm. And when you think about it, look at how people work and how the plant and equipment are used. What chemicals and substances are being used? What unsafe workplace practices that exist in your business, and then look at the general state of your work, of your premises. Look back at the accident, at your accident and ill health records, as this will help you identify the less obvious risks. There are risks that you don't see them openly. You don't realize that there is smoke that actually filtrates into the. Let's say you are in a factory, and the office staff are probably less protected than the people in the factory, because the people in
mm,
the factory have the inhalers, the hot, and you don't realize that whatever you're preventing in the factory is probably drifting into the office space, and the people in the office space don't have the necessary safety protection that the people in the factory may be having. So having records would help you identify these less obvious risks. Take account of non-routine operations such as maintenance, such as
mm,
cleaning and changes in production cycles. Think about the hazards uh, to health, things like manual handling, use of chemicals, and things that cause work-related stress. For each hazard, think how the employees, contractors, visitors, or members of the public may be harmed. Workplace risk is not just about your staff that work
mm,
in your place. The people walking in. If today, Kenji, you came to a workplace, na uteleze uanguke, and you
mm,
injured your back, you can legally take action. And that
mm,
is why we will discuss this later. That's why there's something called public liability. Because anybody walking into a premises of a business, if something happens to them there, the owners of the business are liable. Either it could be probably it's by mistake, it could be something that was unforeseen, but it doesn't matter. It's the owners of the building, of the workspace, are liable. So that's why we are talking about members of the public. Also, amongst your employees and contractors may be harmed. Now, there's also an issue of vulnerable workers. Some workers require particular environment, particular requirements. For example, young workers, migrant workers, people who are new or newly expectant mothers, and people with disabilities. When somebody is new, they don't know their way around. Kenji, if today you are running a factory and you have hired somebody new, he does not know there's a certain trapdoor somewhere, or they need to wear safety shoes. They do not know that probably they need to wear a helmet if it is in a factory. Or if it's just a typical workplace, they might go into the server room, waanze kushikashika vitu huko, and then they get electrocuted. So, so those are particular people with particular requirements, expectant mothers. Even in an office setting, there are certain things they might not be able to do. Migrant people coming in from a different country, you've got to treat them a bit different because they might not be able to know the things that natives do know. So part of the things that you do to help vulnerable workers or to just mitigate risks in the workplace include talk to your workers, involve your employees, because as we have discovered in this podcast in the past, many employees have very, very good ideas. And then another thing that you could do is assess the risks. Once you have identified the hazards, decide how likely is that someone could be harmed and how serious that could be. Now, this is very important in assessing the level of risk, because you've got to think the worst case scenario. If somebody walked into my office, now the cleaner did not mop the floor well, akipiga, flip side, anguke achape chini, they hit their head on the floor. So what happens? Yeah, how will we get an ambulance quickly to take them to hospital? If it's somebody very important, if it's an expectant mother, and now there are issues to do with miscarriage, what will you do? Do we have any form of risk mitigation for that? Do we take care, even before we think about them falling here? Do we tell our workers when to clean and how to clean before people walk in? So those are some of the ways that you assess the risks that are involved in the workplace. Now, another thing that you need to do is decide who might be harmed and how. So, what are you doing already to control the risks? What further action do you need to take to control these risks? Who needs to carry out the action of controlling that risk? And looking at what you have already been doing and the controls that you already have in place, then you can sit and ask yourself, okay, I've done A, I've done B, I've done C. Could I get rid of this this hazard altogether? If not, how can I control the risk so that the harm is unlikely? So I could go on and on and on and on, but basically, you've got to find a way to identify the risk. Look at the workplace where you are at. Look at first of all, what business am I doing? If you're, for example, running a school, then you need to look and see, okay, I'm running a school, so that means I've got to take care of things like there are no manholes that are open. The classes are they are clean, they are not dusty, and they're also not slippery. You've made sure that the stairs are, guardrails are there, and all those kind of things. Teachers also are able to move back and forth well. And then when kids, for example, are getting into school and leaving school using your school bus, is the school bus well maintained? Do you have a driver who is competent? Do you have some form of insurance in case the kids get injured while going to school or coming from going to school from home, or going back home from school using the school bus? Do you have some form of risk mitigation in case of an accident? So these are the ways, depending on what you do, you identify, you look specifically what could happen, and then you try and find a ways either to eliminate it altogether or to control it if you cannot be able to eliminate it altogether.
Wow, Tony, fantastic information. In fact, what is coming to mind is I'm looking at the difference between a good and a great organization. Are those organizations first that have identified those hazards, what we're calling risk, and they have taken measures to create a conducive workplace, a place where workers or employees want to come and just give in their best, and they're equipped with the proper gear. Because I'm looking especially construction. There's some companies that really put their employees or their team at risk. Guys don't go with the proper safety measures. They don't even have those disclaimers around the construction site. And it is important for us to be able to identify what those risks are and how we are going to mitigate them. Now, we have Martin Miner is on the comment section and is saying, are there risk assessment specialists in Kenya? Martin, we already have one who's speaking to us. If you need to contact him, I'll run his number on the screen. And he's also asking, how often should risk assessment be done? So even as we move on to Zippy, I'd like if you could also tackle this as we proceed, because I believe it's an important question, because some people are like, is it an annual event? Does it happen monthly, weekly? So what's the basis for that?
So thank you so much, Martin, for that question. And the first question, whether there are risk specialists in Kenya. Yes, we do have risk specialists in Kenya, risk assessment specialists in Kenya. And it's important for us to know, actually, these are experts who are certified by the Ministry of Labor through the Department of OSHA. So it's important for us to know they are there. They might not be as many, but we do have specialists in Kenya. And the other question Martin asked is, how often should risk assessments be done? I would say this needs to be done as often as it's needed. Most organizations, especially bigger organizations, you find actually they have a risk department where, some of these mitigations are assessed continuously and mitigation are put in place. But legally, it's important for us to know, as per the OSHA Act, we are required to do assessments at least once a year and file those returns with the Department of OSHA. So it's important for us to know once a year, legally, you're supposed to do your assessments. However, depending on the risk that your organization might be having in terms of how your employees work, you might need to do your assessments as often as it is necessary to make sure you mitigate some of these challenges. Now, to just add on what Anthony was talking about, and he talked about, slippery floors and someone probably, falling. And it took me back to, our own houses, because we employ people in our homes. And they sometimes we bring people who are coming, for example, from our country, and they have no idea about slippery floors. And we tell them you need to clean the house. And most of the time what happens, and I'm sure there's a lot of employers who employ house managers who will attest to this, you are false in the house simply because we have not either identified this risk, or we have not put mitigation measures, or we have not educated the people who are having to handle this particular role to know that there are risks that come with this particular assignment. So it's important for us to know we need to identify. And when we are talking about risk and how to identify, we need to be aware, there are physical work environment risks. There are risks that come with use of equipment, use of materials, use of substances. And in this particular instance, we need to be aware, do we need to give our staff PPEs? What kind of PPEs are expected to be given to our staff? The tasks we give our employees to do, sometimes they come with risks, depending on how they need to perform those tasks. Sometimes they need to lift heavy materials or heavy stuff. Those are risks. If someone breaks their back, what are the consequences of that? The work design and how we manage that. These are some of the risks we need to be aware. And I think Tony has handled it very comprehensively. We need to understand, we need to identify what hazards are within our workplace. We need to assess those risks. We need to put measures in place to control those risks. And of course, we need to continuously review the control measures we have put in place if we are going to have a hazard free environment. And I think that will be my take on that. And Martin again has asked another question. Are drills legally required? Yes, they are required. When you're doing these audits, and we'll be talking about, we'll have an expert coming in another 2 weeks who will help us understand the OSHA Act in specific. When you're talking about fire and safety, for example, you need to do fire training, you need to do first aid training, you need to have fire marshals, you need to have first aiders, you need to make sure you know drills are done. You need to do an audit when it comes to fire and safety and make sure you have filed those reports. But unfortunately, either out of lack of knowing or ignorance, because sometimes we don't really seek out for this information, we don't know. But it is required by law for us to do that.
Wow, fantastic. Martin, now you heard it from the professionals themselves. The law has put it very clearly. There also has to be drills. And I usually see some of those activities and exercises in some offices. That's what I'm saying. That's what really distinguishes a good employer. You see, guys have run into the quadrangle. What are you guys doing? We're doing a fire drill. What? And I'm like, those are some of the things I see in movies. But hey, we need to implement them here in our country. So, and it's important for us also to make sure that our workplaces are safe. Safety first. Safety first. We need to insist, overemphasize on that. Now, I'm seeing our time is coming to a close.
Kenji, just before we close, just that particular question about fire drills is a very interesting question, because thinking about different dynamics of the workplace, I'm thinking about a scenario where, take an example like a school, where you don't just have workers, you have your clients who are your students as well.
Yes.
Most of these schools, and we have seen, unfortunately, schools where, we have lost life or property when schools, are burnt down. And the question, and I'm sure the Ministry of Education probably looks into some of these things, but the question, as a business person, what are the mitigation measures, for example, you're putting in place? If you are to have a fire, for example, in a school setup, what should your employees do? What should your clients who are your students, what are they supposed to do? Do they know? And I think it's important for us to think about some of these things very critically, so that we know what do we need to do to put measures in place. Simple things like the fire assembly point is a requirement by law. If you are to have an audit, that's the first thing they will come and find out. Where's your fire assembly point? If there was to be a fire, for example, and people go to assemble, what happens next? How do you get to identify everyone is accounted for? And these are small things that we take for granted, but they become very critical. So it's important for us to think about some of these things depending on the kind of a business we are running, and identify those risks and how do we mitigate the same. If we don't have in-house capacity to help us with the same, it's important to reach out for support from experts, so that you don't end up dealing with a risk that ends up becoming very expensive. And I know Anthony can talk about this a lot. When now this becomes expensive and it starts taking a toll on your business, because now finances come into play. So it's important for us to think about our own particular businesses and the risks that are particularly involved in our businesses.
Well said.
Yes.
So as we wrap up, Tony, any last words as a risk expert here?
Well, out there are serious risk experts. Let me tell you, Kenji. But as you say, indeed, from an Aurum perspective, I handle the aspect of risk. And I would like to tell our listeners and our viewers that, as Zippy said earlier, risks are everywhere in your household. How do you your house manager and your children, how are you looking around your house and seeing the risks that could be there? Now, when you go now to the workplace, and even as an employee, Have you looked around and identified the potential hazards there could be? Do you ever think if there was a fire in this building, where would be the easiest fire exits? Are there
Mm,
fire hazards? Say, for example, if I use the example of fire hazards in my office. Are there naked wires? Is my computer well plugged into the socket? Do we have our office? The floors are either dusty or soggy or slippery. Now, going now further into the risk analysis as managers and owners, are you looking at the risks that you could be exposed to, not just in terms of the physical and health, but even in terms of your processes, in terms of your
mm,
processes and planning? If today the CEO got sick and unfortunately during this pandemic related issues, the CEO or a major player in the company got sick and they had to be specialized, will the company keep running or will you come to a stop? OSHA issues dealing with OSHA. Have you handled them? Are you OSHA compliant? So these are some of the things that this month of September, we can discuss and look into and see what are the things that we can discuss and expose the risks that and hazards that are there and see the
mm.
ways to mitigate them as individuals and as companies. That is my closing remarks.
Well said, well said, well said. Zippy, do you have anything to add?
I would say let's come on Saturdays and let's engage each other on this important conversation because
Mm,
risk is part of doing business and we can't run away from it. Compliance is a requirement, is a must if we are going to run our business as well. So let's come and learn. Let's engage each other. Let's learn from each other so that we can be compliant in our own businesses.
well, thank you. Today we've just touched on the basics. We
Mm.
have not even gone deeper into what that means. And that's why we want to invite you next week. We are here every Saturday, 9 a.m., religiously. You will find some information about human resource and risk. So please join us. And I can see Martin is asking, Martin, you are engaged this morning. Thank you, brother. Most companies have a fleet, I should assume. Is this included in the OSHA? So we're going to be answering that question next week. Next week, we're going to be touching, in fact, on how do we transfer these risks. I usually see some billboards, and especially in malls or public spaces, where the property managers put any loss or damage to your property. No, we are not liable to any loss or damage of your property. And I'm like, are you just forcing, are you transferring risk by force?
Mm.
Yeah.
Or who said we are coming to your mall? We want to give you business. Please keep our cars safe, keep our property safe. But I think there's a reason why those billboards are erected in those parking lots. So we'd like to hear some of, and especially from risk experts. We would like to know, how do we actually transfer risk and how do we do it legally, right? So guys,
Yes.
thank you for joining us this morning. It has been an amazing morning. I had so much fun. All we can say is that you can catch us next week, same time, same place. Bye. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.